High on the ceiling of a temple in southern Egypt, cut into a single beam of pale stone, there is a shape that should not be there. It has a body, it has a nose, it has a tail, and running across the top of it is a long, flat blade. To anyone alive today, the shape reads in an instant. It is a helicopter, and it is not alone. Carved into the same beam, only inches away, is a form with swept lines that looks like a fighter jet. Beside that, something long and rounded, gliding like a submarine through water. And beside that, a heavy shape sitting on a flat base that a modern soldier would glance at and call a tank. 4 machines. Not one of them would be invented for another 3,000 years. They are not painted on. They are not scratched into the surface by some bored traveler with a blade. They are cut into the original stone of one of the most sacred buildings the ancient world ever raised. And they have been sitting up there, in the shadow of the ceiling, for more than 30 centuries. That is not a rumor. That is not a hoax. Photo passed around the internet at 2 a.m. You can walk into that hall today, tip your head back, and see all 4 of them with your own eyes. Millions of people already have. Most of them stroll right underneath and never look up. Today, we are going to go through exactly what is carved onto that beam, who put it there, and why the neat little explanation that gets repeated to every tour group does not actually close the case. Because the harder you look at this one strip of rock, the more one question refuses to go away, not what the shapes look like. We can all see what they look like. The question is why they are here. Why this beam? Why this temple? Why? Out of every surface in the entire ancient world, these 4 machines appear on the ceiling of a building raised on top of the graves of the first kings of Egypt. Stay with me, because the part that should unsettle you is not the part the believers shout about. It is the part almost nobody talks about at all. Most people who come to this place never really see it. They come for other things. They come for the carvings that everyone photographs, the ones at eye level, the rows of gods and kings so crisp they look like they were finished last year. They come and they leave, and the strangest object in the building passes over their heads unnoticed, because the machines are not down where the crowds gather. They are up on an architrave, a stone crossbeam high in the first great hall, in the top band of the carving. Easy to miss unless you already know to look. Most people walk right past the real mystery without ever knowing it is there. The building itself is a memorial temple, and it sits in a place called Abydos, near the modern town of Al-Baliana, about 300 miles south of Cairo and a short way west of the Nile. And Abydos is not just another ruin. It is one of the oldest sacred sites in all of Egypt. Long before this temple existed, this ground was a royal burial place for the very first pharaohs, the god kings who unified the country at the dawn of its recorded history. Their tombs lie in the desert nearby. In a field of low mounds, the local people came to call the Mother of Pots, because for thousands of years, pilgrims left so many offering jars there that the broken pottery still crunches underfoot. It was the cult center of the god of the dead and of resurrection. And every year, the priests here staged the death and rising of that god as a kind of sacred drama. Egyptians, who could not be buried here, paid to have stones and small tombs set up nearby, just to be close, just to catch a little of that power in the afterlife. So when a new kingdom pharaoh chose to build here, he was not picking an empty field. He was building on the most haunted, most ancient soil his entire civilization had. And into the ceiling of that building, someone carved 4 machines. Think about the distance in time that this involves, because it is easy to say the words and miss the weight of them. When Seti's masons were cutting this temple, the first kings buried a short walk away were already ancient. They were as far in the past to Seti as the fall of Rome is to us, and further. This was a civilization looking back across its own vast history and choosing this one spot as the anchor of it all. Everything about the place was intentional. The Egyptians did not build casually, and they did not build here casually most of all. Now, here is the thing you have to understand before we go any further, because it changes everything about how you read that ceiling. The Egyptians did not decorate, not the way we mean it. When they cut a picture into a temple wall, it was not there to look nice. It was there to say something, to record something, to make something permanent. Their writing was picture writing. Every bird, every reed, every arm and eye and coil of rope was a sound, a word, a meaning locked into stone so it could not be lost. And their ceilings were the same. Overhead, in temple after temple, they carved the sky goddess arched across the world, her body studded with stars. They carved the star clocks that divided the night into hours. For a long time, we called all of that mythology. Pretty stories painted overhead. But those stories are astronomical records. Those painted skies track real celestial cycles with real precision. The rising of certain stars, the turning of the year, not a myth, a record. Hold on to that because it is exactly what makes the four machines a problem. If nearly every other image on that ceiling is a careful record of something real, then what precisely is a helicopter a record of? Let us start with the shapes themselves, because that is the clue you can see the fastest, and it is the one that has pulled people back to this beam for decades. Read the carving the way the Egyptians read it, from right to left, and the forms line up in a row like a parade. The most famous is the helicopter. It is uncanny. There is a rounded cockpit, a body tapering to a tail, and that unmistakable rotor blade laid flat across the top. People who have never believed a strange thing in their lives have stood under it and gone quiet, because the resemblance is not vague, it is specific. Next to it, the shape most people call a jet or a plane, with what looks like a swept wing and a pointed nose. Then the long rounded hull that reads as a submarine or an airship. Then the blockier form that suggests a tank or some heavy armored craft. Four modern machines, sitting in a neat sequence on a beam older than almost anything you have ever touched. And here is the first strange fact. Those four shapes do not translate. Take the rest of that ceiling, the rest of that temple, and every sign has a meaning. They are not words in the Egyptian language. They correspond to no known sound, no title, no name, no phrase. In the middle of the most literate, most rule-bound writing system the ancient world produced, in a temple where every other sign obeys the grammar, sits a little cluster of shapes that says, by the ordinary rules, absolutely nothing. To feel why that is so odd, you have to understand how tightly the Egyptians controlled their art. Their carvers did not sketch freely. They worked to a strict grid, a canon of proportion so fixed that a human figure was laid out square by square the same way for thousands of years. The rules told them how a hand should sit, how a bird should stand, how deep to cut, how the signs should march in their columns. An Egyptian artist had roughly as much freedom to improvise on a temple ceiling as a scribe copying a holy book has to invent new letters. That is what makes the four shapes stand out. This is a system that punished deviation in a temple raised by kings who deleted people from history for stepping out of line, and yet right there on the ceiling is a run of forms that breaks every rule of the grammar around it. That should bother you. A culture that carved with this much discipline did not leave meaningless doodles on its most sacred stone by accident. Or, if it did, something very unusual had to happen to put them there. Here is where it gets strange, because the more you sit with those four shapes, the more you realize the mystery is not really the helicopter at all. The helicopter is the door. What is behind the door is the harder question, and it is the reason people keep coming back. So before we go through it, let me tell you what is still waiting further in. There is the identity of the two men whose fingerprints are all over this beam. Two of the most powerful kings who ever lived. There is a buried underground chamber right behind this temple, built from stone so massive that people still argue about who could have moved it. And there is a wall, only steps away, where the Egyptians did something to their own history that they thought would be permanent. Three things, and every one of them makes the machines on the ceiling stranger. not simpler. That is the second clue. And the third, and we are getting to both. The temple was built by a pharaoh named Seti I. He ruled Egypt roughly 33 centuries ago, from about 1290 to 1279, before the Common Era, as the second king of the 19th dynasty, in the era we call the New Kingdom. He was a soldier and a restorer, a man who came to power after a chaotic stretch of Egyptian history and set out to put the old order back together. His very name tells you something about the man. Seti means, roughly, the one of Set. Set was the Egyptian god of storms, of the desert, of chaos and disorder. This was a king consecrated to the force of chaos, building the most orderly, most exquisitely carved temple of his age, on the oldest sacred ground in the country. And he did not finish it. He died first. The temple was completed by his son, and the son was not a minor figure. The son was Ramesses II, Ramses the Great, the longest and most famous reign in Egyptian memory, a man who plastered his own name across more of Egypt than any pharaoh before or since. So the beam with the machines on it was worked by two hands across two reigns, a father and a son, both of them obsessed with permanence. Both of them men who understood exactly what it meant to carve something into stone forever. And that matters because it means whatever ended up on that ceiling was not the work of some careless apprentice left alone with a chisel. It happened in a royal temple under two of the most controlling rulers in the history of the ancient world. Keep that in your mind. It is going to come back. Now, the resemblance to modern machines is not the only reason this temple pulls at people. It is famous for something else entirely. And this is the second clue. And it turns the whole place from a curiosity into something colder. Because inside this same building is a wall that proves the people who ran this temple were willing to erase history when it suited them. In one gallery of the temple, a corridor some call the Hall of the Ancestors, there is a long list carved into the stone, a roll call of kings. 76 of them, in neat rows of cartouches, the oval rings that enclose a royal name. It runs from Menes, the legendary first king who unified Egypt, all the way down through the centuries to Seti himself, who is shown standing with his young son before the whole line of his forefathers. It covers something like 1,600 years of rulers. When a European traveler first recorded it in the early 1800s, it landed on the young science of Egyptology like a gift, because it is one of only a handful of such lists ever found, so complete and so valuable that scholars have called it a kind of Rosetta Stone for the Order of the Pharaohs. It is the closest thing we have to an official family tree of Egypt, carved by the state in the state's own house. And it is a lie by omission, because certain kings are missing, deliberately. A famous female pharaoh who ruled as king is gone. The heretic king who tried to erase Egypt's old gods and replace them with a single son is gone. And so is his whole line, including the boy king whose golden tomb the whole world knows today. They were real. They ruled. And on this wall, in this temple, the people of Seti's court simply left them out, as if they had never existed. On one of the oldest cartouches, they even chipped away part of a name that had stood for over 1,000 years. This is not decoration. This is editing. This is a government reaching into the record of who had ever existed and quietly deleting the names it did not want remembered. And it happened in the same building, under the same kings, whose hands were on the beam with the machines. If a discovery like this keeps you up at night the way it does me, take 1 second to subscribe, because the deepest part of this story is the part they never get to on the tour. So now, put those two facts side by side. In one room, a civilization carefully, permanently, and secretly rewrote its own history. In another room, on the ceiling, that same civilization left behind 4 shapes that look exactly like machines from our world, and that spell nothing in theirs. That is the question that will not close. And we are only halfway to how strange it gets. Because here is the third clue, and it is the biggest one. And it is the reason the smart, careful version of this mystery is more unsettling than the wild one. The machines are not floating in some blank corner of the ceiling. They sit in a very particular place. They sit inside the names of the kings. That whole strip of carving is a titulary. In plain terms, it is the long, formal string of names and titles that an Egyptian pharaoh carried, a chain of boastful phrases attached to his identity. And the phrases here are war phrases. One of the titles, belonging to Seti, describes him as the powerful one, strong with the blade, the one who crushes the 9 bows. The 9 bows was the Egyptian shorthand for the enemies of Egypt. The 9 traditional foreign peoples a pharaoh symbolically trampled underfoot, drawn quite literally as a row of 9 bows. It is a phrase about domination, about a king standing on the necks of his enemies. And woven into that phrase, into the run of signs that carries it, are the shapes we now read as machines. The rounded body of the famous helicopter is built, in part, out of the ancient sign for a bow. The blades and struts around it are built out of other real signs, arms, and marks that belonged to genuine words. The machines are not written in some lost alien script. They are assembled out of the ordinary building blocks of Egyptian writing, packed into the war titles of 2 conquering kings. Sit with what that means. The single most famous supposed piece of ancient technology on Earth, the image people point to when they want to argue that someone from the future or the stars visited the pharaohs, is stitched together from the Egyptian words for power, for weapons, and for enemies. The helicopter is, in one honest reading, a picture that spells conquest. And it is not just Seti's name up there. His son's name is there too, in the exact same space, occupying the exact same stone. 2 kings, 1 beam, their titles pressed into the same few inches of rock, not side by side, on top of each other. Then modern tools got involved. And that is where the picture sharpened into something no one could wave away. For most of history, all anyone had was the naked eye and a candle, craning up at a shadowed ceiling, seeing a helicopter, and gasping. But with high-resolution photography and careful modern recording of the temple, researchers could finally map that beam sign by sign and lay the whole tangle out flat where it could be studied. And what the survey confirmed was that 2 complete royal names really do occupy that one run of stone, one carved over the other, both partly present at the same time. The father's titles and the son's titles, sharing a surface, not similar names, not 2 names near each other. The same stone carrying both, superimposed so that in places the signs of one king cross straight through the signs of the other. Why press your own royal titles directly over the titles of the king who came before you, in his own sacred building, in the holiest ground in Egypt? The official answer to that is coming, and it is a good one. But notice that even the calm, sober facts here are strange. 2 of the most powerful kings in human history left their names crushed together on a single beam over the graves of the first pharaohs. And out of that collision came 4 shapes that would not make sense to a human being for another 3,000 years. For most of history, hardly anyone outside Egypt knew the beam existed. Then, in the last decade of the 20th century, a handful of photographs of that ceiling escaped into the wider world, and the reaction was instant. The helicopter spread from photograph to photograph, from lecture to broadcast, and within a few years it had become one of the most argued over images in all of Egyptian archaeology. People who had never heard of Abydos suddenly knew this. One strip of stone. And the strange thing about that fame is what it did to the questions. The louder people shouted about aircraft and visitors from the stars, the less anyone stopped to sit with the quieter facts. That 2 kings shared one beam. That the shapes ride inside war titles. That this happened in the single building where the Egyptians were provably willing to rewrite their own past. The noise buried the mystery instead of solving it. And this temple is not done being strange. Step out the back of it, and the ground drops away into one of the eeriest structures in Egypt. It is an underground chamber, half sunk below the temple, built from red granite blocks so enormous that people have argued for over a century about how they were moved and set. It sits at a deliberately low level, and today it floods, water seeping up from the ground to fill the channel around a central island of stone. The Egyptians built it that way on purpose, to touch the groundwater so the chamber would represent the primeval ocean of creation, the first waters from which the first mound of land rose. It was dug out by two famous archaeologists in the years around 1902, and from the moment it came out of the sand, it has refused to sit quietly in the story. At its heart is a raised island of stone, ringed by a channel of water, reached across what was once a kind of causeway. The whole thing staged like a model of the first land rising out of the first ocean. It's raw, colossal, almost brutal stonework, giant blocks of red granite, fitted together with almost no ornament, looks nothing like the delicate relief in the temple above it. And the debate over exactly when and how it was made has never fully ended. It is the kind of place that makes you feel how much older this ground is than the building that crowns it. And it sits, right now, in the dark, filling slowly with water, a few steps behind the beam with the machines. Now, does any of this prove the wild version of the story? That the ancient Egyptians flew helicopters, that they saw our machines in a vision, that someone from another world handed them the blueprints and they carved what they were shown? No. Let me be honest with you, because you deserve better than a con. The explanation the experts give is real, and it is strong, and pretending otherwise would be an insult. Here it is, plainly. The Egyptians recarved their monuments all the time. When a new king took over, it was common to write his names over the names of the king before him. And that is exactly what happened on this beam. The original titles belonged to Seti. After he died, his son Ramesses had the surface filled in with plaster and recut with his own titles on top. Seti's phrase about crushing the 9 bows was covered over and replaced by a phrase of Ramesses, the protector of Egypt who drives back the foreign lands. For a while, fresh plaster hid the older carving and everything read cleanly. But plaster does not last 3,000 years. Water worked into the ceiling. The filling cracked and fell out in patches, and where it fell away, the old carving underneath showed through again, tangled up with the newer carving on the surface. 2 sets of signs, from 2 kings bleeding into each other. The helicopter is what you get when the bow sign from the father's name overlaps with 2 arm signs from the son's name, and the eye of a modern person fills in the rest. Egyptologists are essentially unanimous about this. A leading scholar of Ramesses the Great, who has written the most detailed modern study of it, calls it exactly what it is: an accident of overlapping inscriptions. A trick of pattern that our brains complete into machines because we know what machines look like, and the ancient carver did not. This is not a cover-up. It is well documented, sign by sign. The machines are a coincidence produced by a father, a son, some plaster, and time. So, no, this is not proof of ancient aircraft, and I am not going to pretend it is. But here is what that calm, sober explanation still cannot make ordinary. Strip away every wild theory, take the aliens and the lost technology, and throw them out entirely, and you are still left with a set of plain facts that are stranger than the fantasy. You are left with a civilization more than 3,000 years ago that carved with such rule-bound precision that its writing can still be read today, that tracked the stars overhead with real accuracy, that edited its own recorded history so deliberately that it deleted kings, and that built an underground hall of colossal stone to touch the waters of creation. You are left with the fact that this particular overlap, this one collision of 2 names on one beam, happens to produce 4 shapes that map onto 4 modern machines, with a precision that has haunted people for decades. When the exact same practice of recarving happened tens of thousands of times across Egypt, and, as far as anyone has ever shown, produced nothing else like it. Not close, not once. The explanation tells you how the shapes got there. It does not tell you why here, on this beam over these graves, the accident lined up so perfectly. You do not need aliens to be unsettled by that. You just need to look at what is actually on the stone. And if even the modest version of this is true, it means something uncomfortable about how we read the ancient world. It means that a picture we were certain was decoration turned out to be two hidden layers of writing, invisible until the surface decayed, and gave them up. It means that a civilization we file away as distant and primitive was recording, layering, hiding, and editing its own words with a subtlety we almost missed entirely. How much of what we call myth on those ceilings is actually record? How much of what we call coincidence in Egyptian stone is really just us standing underneath it, unable to read what a people this careful were trying to say? Our picture of the ancient world is not a finished portrait. It is a sketch, with whole layers still buried under the plaster. So, here is the question that will not let go. On the ceiling of a temple built over the graves of the first kings of Egypt, in the war titles of two of the most powerful men who ever lived, sit four shapes that spell nothing in their language and everything in ours. We know how the plaster fell. We know whose names collided. What we do not know, what no one can tell you, is why this one strip of stone out of every surface the Egyptians ever cut is the one that speaks to us in the shapes of our own machines. And whether the people who packed 2 kings and 1,000 hidden signs into a single beam over the oldest bones in Egypt were really as unaware of what they were making as we would like to believe. The temple is still standing at Abydos, exactly where it has stood for more than 33 centuries. The wall of erased kings is still there, still missing the names they chose to forget. The flooded chamber behind it is still filling in the dark, its enormous stones still unexplained to everyone's satisfaction. And the machines are still up on the ceiling, in the shadow of that high beam, where 2 kings pressed their names together and left behind a picture that no one who carved it could ever have understood. Millions of people walk beneath it every year. Almost none of them look up. And the shapes wait up there in the dark, the way they have waited since before the first word of our history was written, still spelling conquest to the eyes that can read them, and something else entirely to the eyes that cannot.